Hello and welcome to the audio version of the Negotiation Briefer, Assigning Delegation Roles. This recording is an audio complement to the written publication Negotiation Briefer, Assigning Delegation Roles, which is available on the PILPG website and is intended to offer some additional context to the briefing material and to share an insider's view of the topics. I'm here today with Dr. Paul Williams, the founder and president of the Public International Law and Policy Group, or PILPG. PILPG is a global pro bono law firm providing free legal assistance and policy planning support to parties involved in peace negotiations, drafting post-conflict constitutions, and prosecuting atrocity crimes. Paul has over 30 years of experience in assisting over 36 parties to negotiations, and today he's here to share some insights from his experiences in these peace negotiations and assisting delegations with assigning roles for various members of their delegation. So thanks for joining, Paul.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Nicole.
So when looking at any successful operation, each person plays a unique and critical role. Peace negotiations are no different. Negotiations are highly complex processes that involve multiple parties, issues, and agendas. To be successful in accomplishing their goals, parties to negotiation must put significant effort into their preparations so that their delegation can be as effective and efficient as possible. One key aspect of this preparation is for parties to assign clearly defined roles to individuals within the delegation. By doing this, a party can improve its delegation cohesion, collaboration, and effectiveness. So, is it true that we really need these assigned positions or roles within a delegation to a peace negotiation?
Oh, most definitely. One of the biggest mistakes that my pro bono clients involved in peace negotiations have made repeatedly over the years is to assume that you go into a negotiation and you play yourself. That you simply act as you think, act as you feel, and negotiate in the way that you learned in your life on how to negotiate. That is a recipe for disaster. We've all played team sports. Every single team sport has positions, has roles. You don't send 5 people onto the basketball court and say, okay, go ahead and play the game, because all 5 will chase the ball and shoot the ball. You need to have a role, and that's the only way that you can effectively operate as a team and effectively achieve your goals, which both literally and figuratively in sports as well as negotiations.
Okay, so to pick up on your sports metaphor, in football, we have the goalies, the midfielders, and the attackers. Are there any common or specific roles for delegations to peace negotiations?
Yes, there are 10 positions. And if I could think of an 11th position, we'd have a full-on football team with our negotiation delegations. But give me a second, Nicole, and I can run through list off these various positions. The first is that you have the decision maker, which is essentially the coach. And we can talk a little bit about this, but it would stay off the field, so to speak. You then have the chairperson of the delegation who's in the room, essentially the team captain. You'd have a spokesperson who is occasionally in the room, but mostly outside of the room and frequently outside of the venue of the negotiations. You'll need 1 or more technical experts, and I put a plug in for lawyer. You always want a lawyer as a technical expert on your delegation. You'll want a person of influence, a person of stature, an antagonist/emotional person. You'll need a red team strategist, a back channel negotiator, your own hidden interpreter, informal interpreter. And I can explain what I mean by that. And then you need a scribe.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Now, what I would like to do is simply walk through in more detail the role and responsibility of each delegation member. Beginning with the decision maker. Who is this person and why are they there?
So Nicole, the decision maker is the person who, like in a football match, is the coach. They manage the strategy. They manage the team. They decide who takes the field, who comes off the field. They decide who the team captain is going to be, and they are ultimately responsible for whether or not the delegation achieves its goals in the course of the negotiation. And this is someone who can either be present in the venue or in the city where the negotiation is occurring, but should seldom, if presumably never, enter the actual negotiation room itself. Sometimes they may be, if they're a prime minister or president, a foreign minister, they may be even out of the country, still in their home country, but they're the one who is ultimately responsible for the strategy, and the person whom the chairperson, we can talk about in a second, would say, I'd like to make this compromise. I'll have to check with the decision maker, with the head of delegation, so to speak. Now, the head of delegation is also intensively engaged in bilateral or tete-a-tete type of negotiations with the decision maker from the other side, or maybe occasionally with the chief mediator, or if it's the UN that's mediating, maybe with the secretary general. So they operate at a very high level with other decision makers, and then in a supervisory capacity over the delegation.
Okay, so they're in their home country. They're not necessarily where the negotiations are happening. You mentioned the chairperson. I'm guessing now this person is the leader in the room itself.
Yeah, the chairperson is the individual who's responsible for the tactical implementation of the strategy that the decision maker sets. So the chairperson chairs the internal delegation meeting every morning and every evening, because you want to do one before and after the day's negotiation. And then throughout the negotiation of the day, the chairperson is almost always sitting in the center chair and directing the delegation. Importantly, the chairperson seldom speaks beyond the welcoming protocol remarks, kicking off the negotiation. Today, we're going to make some progress on this particular topic. And then at the end, okay, that was productive. Let's do this, let's do that. But the chairperson in the room also does not do specific negotiation. Now, this is where negotiations diverge from sports. The team captain on the field is heavily engaged in the activity of the team, but in the negotiation, they're signaling who should be speaking when and why and what they should be saying. They manage the tactical engagement. They themselves do not implement the tactical engagement of the negotiation delegation.
You also mentioned there being a spokesperson. Now, I'm guessing this person does a lot of talking, but can you expand on how, when, or why?
Now, the spokesperson does a lot of talking outside of the room. The role of the spokesperson is to manage, manipulate, influence the media, and to basically, whenever there's a public announcement that the decision maker or the chairperson would like to go out to the media, it's the spokesperson who makes that announcement and then answers questions. The spokesperson will also sit with the media on a 24/7 basis and provide backstories, provide additional context, basically seek to win over and influence the perspective of the media, the affinity of the media for that delegation's approach. We can talk in a second about the spokesperson should be in the know about everything that's happening, but still have plausible deniability. Mistakes are going to happen. You're going to say things that are incorrect or things that have to be walked back, and the spokesperson needs to correct the record. The spokesperson can also say, look, I'll need to seek further clarification on that, and then can go back and the decision maker, the chairperson, can say, yeah, no, we don't want to provide additional information, or sure, here's additional information. In terms of relationship building, we were at a negotiation in France, and our spokesperson spent literally the entire time in coffee shops. He had said, I've never drunk so much coffee in my life, because the journalists were only allowed access for the noon press briefing during this negotiation, but they wanted to stay near the chateau so that they could pick up any information or any leaks. And he spent his entire time working the narrative of our pro bono client with the journalist while they were hanging about the coffee shop. And the positive press that our pro bono client received was probably more than 50% influenced by the informal conversation with the spokesperson. The other reason why you want, Nicole, to have a designated spokesperson, every member of the delegation is going to want to grab a microphone, is going to want to make a statement to the press. It's the rules of a delegation should be that only the spokesperson speaks to the media, but it's very difficult to enforce. But if you have an identified spokesperson, it's very easy for the media to cite that person as a spokesperson of the delegation. And then if somebody else breaks from the delegation and goes and gives a press conference or makes a statement, that's okay. But it won't be confused as the official position of the delegation because you have a publicly acknowledged and a public-facing spokesperson. I'll also mention briefly that the spokesperson, especially for non-state delegations, can effectively arrange interactions between the media and marginalized groups, victims groups, others who've suffered from atrocities committed by the opposing party. Oftentimes, those individuals don't have access to the media pool, so to speak, but a spokesperson can oftentimes facilitate and amplify the voice of victims during a peace process. We did a negotiation in Geneva. Every single day, the spokesperson for the opposition delegation we were working for hosted a special media briefing in one of the auxiliary rooms outside of the UN building, where a victims group, a women's group, a youth group would share their stories about the atrocities being committed by the state that the opposition group was negotiating with.
So this person seems to really be a critical interlocutor. And so thank you for sharing some of those insights when you were working with different spokespeople in different contexts. Moving closer to those who are at the negotiating table, technical experts may or may not be in the room all the time. Can you expand on this role? What kind of technical experts there may be? You mentioned lawyers. Are there others? And expand on why this person was brought to the negotiations.
Yeah, Nicole, any delegation will need to have a pool of technical experts that can be deployed at any given point in time into the negotiation room. And there's only 10 roles for the delegation. There's probably 25, 26 members of a delegation, over 24, let's say over 24 members of any effective delegation. And those members will oftentimes be military experts. If you're going to be negotiating a ceasefire as part of the agreement, or security sector reform, or demilitarization, demobilization, reintegration, you'll need military experts. Oftentimes you'll need governance experts. If you're going to be talking about, do we do parliamentary or presidential or unicameral or bicameral, or what does the transition period look like? You're going to need some political scientists, people from your delegation, from your party, so to speak, know those details. Natural resources, oil, gold, water, hugely complicated. And everyone knows that they want ownership of those resources, but the rules that govern the extraction, the rules that govern the management, the rules that govern the allocation of that revenue, very complicated, and you're going to need experts. You're also going to need lawyers. Words matter. What gets written down, what gets agreed to is important for the long-term durability of the agreement. So you'll need to bring lawyers into the room on a near constant basis, and lawyers with different expertise. You'll need to find technical experts that are genuinely technical and apolitical. Oftentimes, the decision maker, the chair, what we talk about person of influence, the red team strategist, will have an expertise, and they'll want to play a role as an expert as well as representing their constituencies or representing their role. But the technical experts essentially need to be individuals that don't have constituencies, because the delegation itself is going to have to represent the entire collage of interests and constituencies of the party that it's representing. And so you don't want to confuse, well, are you giving me military expertise or legal expertise, or is this the legal position or the military position of your constituency?
So these people are what you would say are objective members of the delegation. And on the opposite of that, we have the persons of influence. Now, this term has developed a very specific meaning in the public discourse in the age of social media, but in the context of peace negotiations, what is this person's job?
The person of influence is someone who has a level of positive notoriety or seniority, or is genuinely well respected, not only by your party, but by the other party. So this person of influence would intermittently engage as a member of the delegation in the room and would be brought to bear when, or in a sense, put into the field when things were so tense or on the verge of a breakdown or the mediator wasn't doing her or his job in a proper way. And this person would need to come in and put things back on track. Or if there was a need for moral authority, a sort of, okay, let's clear aside a lot of the bickering and the argument and the horse trading, and let's remind ourselves of the overall objective or goal, or of the overall difference between sometimes one party is responsible for atrocity crimes and the other party is predominantly the victim of those atrocity crimes. This is when the person of influence can be brought to bear to influence the mediator, or in other instances to influence the opposing party and have that calming effect. So there's different types of activities that the person of influence can pursue, but it's someone who doesn't squander their influence by engaging in the to and fro of negotiation. That's what the technical experts are for, and the other members of the delegation.
And what about the antagonist?
Nicole, every delegation needs an antagonist/emotional person. And every time I say this to one of our pro bono clients, everyone wants to be that person. They all want to shout at the other side. And this person actually has to be the most level-headed, the most calm, the most mindful, the least emotional person, because they need to be able to turn it on and off as a tactical approach to the negotiations at the point in time that is most strategic. So sometimes you, as part of your negotiation strategy, you want to antagonize the other side. Sometimes you want to antagonize the mediator, or at some point in time, you realize that maybe you're losing ground to the other side, or that your own delegation is beginning to fracture or to fray, and you want to. It's an hour and a half till a coffee break, but you need to break. You make a signal to the antagonist/emotional person, and they lose it on the table in the negotiation. And then the chairperson says, okay, maybe we need to settle things a little bit. Why don't we take a break for an hour? Our delegation will go out and have a conversation, and then we'll reconvene. And of course, your delegation goes out and has a strategic conversation because it was a signal to the antagonist emotional person to play that card to disrupt the negotiations. So there could be a break. But there's all kinds of reasons why you want to throw a spanner in the works of the negotiation. But it has to be a person who will sit there and only throw a spanner in the works when they're signaled. And when you want to take the spanner out, that person says, okay, and takes the spanner out.
It does certainly sound like an interesting role to play, nonetheless. Now, we talked about red teaming on another negotiation briefer. Why is there one person now assigned to red teaming on the actual delegation, and what do they do during the live negotiations?
Nicole, everybody believes their own propaganda, and the red team strategist is there to keep you honest. The red team strategist sits at the end of your table and spends the entire time thinking as if they were actually a member of the opposing delegation. So when you're setting forth your plan, they're thinking skeptically about that plan. They're thinking of counter arguments against that plan. They're thinking what the counter proposal could be. And this way, when the delegation reconvenes afterwards and says, wow, yeah, we did great. We really influenced the mediator and we really stuck it to the other party. We made all this great progress. You actually have somebody on your delegation who raises their hand and says, remember, I'm the red team strategist. This is how I saw it from across the table, which is, no, that actually was completely unpersuasive and we have no interest. Or says, you know what, from the red team strategy, I think I see an opportunity for compromise. You may think it's over here, but these couple of points you mentioned at this section of your presentation, yeah, as an opposing team member, I think that would be a place where there might be some opportunity. So when you go back in the next round, you've got a bit of a sense what the red team, what the other team is going to say. Ideally, they'll say, you know what, those few points you made at the very end, we think there's a basis for some compromise there, so that you're constantly prepared. We did an exercise once, Nicole, where we were in West Africa with one of our pro bono clients, and I had the head of the government delegation play the role of the non-state armed actor, the head of the non-state armed actor. He said, no, I'm the head of the government delegation, so that's the role I should play. I'm like, no, the whole idea of this negotiation simulation is for you to red team. And at the coffee break, he said, that was the best exercise I had ever done. I was sitting there as the head of the rebel movement. Across the table, in real life, my deputy was playing me. And he was reading my talking points, which I think are really good. And we were explaining to the rebels how it is that our proposal was in their interest and with substantial concessions. He said, and I wanted to reach across the table and punch myself. I was so infuriated. And the way in which those talking points sounded to me as a rebel leader. And here I've been saying those talking points to the rebel leader, thinking I'm being a successful negotiator. And so seeing it from the other side and having a person on your team who is persistently approaching it from the other side gives you very valuable insight into how to be an effective negotiator and to get to a durable peace.
Talking about seeing things from the other side, back channel negotiator sounds fun. What is this person up to, and what kind of insights are they looking for?
The back channel negotiator, it's a very risky position because the red team, everybody knows you're just playing the role of the other side and thinking of them. The back channel negotiator actually has to go to some of the members of the mediation team and back channel to some of the members of the opposing delegation. Oftentimes, it's best if this back channel conversation happens in the public view. In the United Nations, there's the Diplomats' Lounge in the Peace Palace in Geneva, where negotiations frequently occur. People will mix and mingle in the Diplomats' Lounge, or there's various other public venues where people can meet. Although it's back channel and it's informal, you don't want it to be out of sight, because then that will create conspiracy and distrust. Oftentimes, members of delegations and opposing delegations were friends, went to university together, were in the government together before they split off and became a self-determination movement. Sometimes they'll have fought on the same side against another party and then they split themselves. And so there's a personal dimension that runs parallel to the formal negotiation. So it's shockingly not out of the ordinary for members of opposing delegations to have a coffee or share some time in a public space. But what the back channel negotiator does is floats ideas of compromise, floats ideas of consensus to the mediators or to the opposing party before they're formally floated in the negotiation room. And that way, it does not appear as if a party is making concessions, because if you roll in and the chairperson says, okay, now our expert on such and such is going to put forward some positions, and these positions are concessions, the other side will sense weakness in a public environment or in a open environment in the delegation. Whereas if one friend says to another friend, hey, what do you think about maybe if we split it this way, instead of cutting it horizontally, we cut it vertically, how would that maybe work for you? And then they can float it back and they can come back and give a soft no, which again doesn't cause anybody to lose face. Or they can give a soft yes and say, let's think about it. Let's further discuss it. If the back channel person floats it, the other side says, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And the decision maker and the chairperson have a change of heart. The back channel person can go and say, you know what, I floated that idea. It turns out it wasn't such a great idea. Okay, no worries, mate. But if you're in a delegation and you put forward the number 7, and then you come back the next day and say, oh, no, I'm taking the number 7 off the table. I was just kidding. Oh, bad faith. And aren't you serious? And how can we trust you? But a back channel negotiator can put things on and take things off the table in a very informal, no-cost basis. It is risky because everyone's going to think there's some conspiracy going on. There's some selling out going on. But you need that. You want to maximize the utility of any friendships or any relationships that exist. When I worked for the US government at a multilateral negotiation in Japan, I was assigned to go be the back channel negotiator with the representative from Argentina and the representative from Germany for various, I'd been to Argentina, I'd been to Germany, whatever, various reasons. They were both also lawyers who were heads of their delegation. And they knew exactly what I was doing. And I went up to them to be their friend. They said, oh, you're my back channel negotiator from the American delegation. Yeah, you guys always do that. And my job was basically to find out what the Germans and what the Argentinians were up to in this negotiation. And they shared about 20% of what they were up to. Every morning, the American would go around the table and we'd all report back, what 20% we had picked up from our back channel folks. And so it was a very informal way of maximizing the impact of the American delegation during this negotiation. And everybody knows what's going on. It's just an additional dimension of these negotiations.
Sounds like the majority of the negotiation is happening in these back channels. Very interesting to hear. And what some may see as less interesting is perhaps the role of the interpreter or the scribe. But I'm hoping you're going to enlighten me and change my mind here. Starting with the interpreter, why is it important for each party or each delegation to have its own interpreter?
So Nicole, each party, and this can be a dual role. This can be a role that one of the other, that it could be a technical expert or it could be one of the others. They need to have someone who's fluent in all of the languages that are at play in the negotiation. There will be formal interpreters that the mediation will bring. Each party may also have its own formal interpreter that interprets for their chairperson or for their other members of their delegation. But words matter. Spoken words matter. Written words matter. And you want someone on the delegation whose sole responsibility, I know I just said they could have other roles, but while they're not playing those other roles, their responsibility needs to be tracking the exact language that the other side is using. Often it's the same language, but oftentimes it's not the same language. Even though the Albanians, Serbs during the Kosovo negotiations used different languages, there's local dialects, local languages. But if someone's trying to signal an openness to compromise or a lack of openness to compromise, the nature of the words that they use will be very important. And trained professional interpreters will oftentimes look for the blandest, the most objective, the most widely understood word to translate, as opposed to the nuanced word. There's also metaphors, similes, all kinds of things that make sense to people from the region or from the locality that may not necessarily make sense for an international interpreter. And so you'll need to be able to have someone on your team during the breaks and at the meetings among just the delegation itself, literally interpret what the other side was saying, but more importantly, what the other side was meaning. You'll also need an interpreter to keep things from inadvertently going off the rails. I was in one negotiation. It was the critical point in time. The US Secretary of State came into the meeting and said, do we have an agreement? And one of the parties, because the Americans were part of the team that was mediating, one of the parties had said, yes, we agree on 1, 2, 3, 4. And no, we don't accept number 5. And number 5 was the most important issue. Without number 5, you did not have agreement. The interpreter for the Americans said, yes, they agree. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all great, and then stopped. And everyone started to get all positive and all excited. And it was the person who was playing the role as the interpreter on this delegation who said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry, Secretary of State, your interpreter failed to interpret the last point, which was no, we don't agree on number 5, and therefore, no, we cannot sign this agreement." And but for that person knowing it was their responsibility to intercede and to literally correct the formal interpreter, it did go off the rails, but it would have gone completely off the rails and crashed in the valley. They eventually were able to resurrect and put it back on the rails.
Then how is this role different from that of the scribe?
The scribe writes it all down. The scribe is someone who does the scribing for the delegation late into the evening and puts their proposal on paper. Interestingly, in many cultures, they're focused on oral argument, oral history, oral negotiation. All peace agreements are written. It's oftentimes very difficult to make that bridge between an oral agreement and a written agreement. And again, Nicole, words matter. And so the scribe will draft up the position of the parties to then put before the other party. But even for that, for the delegation to see its own position. So I was involved in a negotiation, a self-determination matter, and I was the scribe, the lawyer and the scribe on this delegation. And there was a particular issue, and the parties were, the team itself, the delegation itself, the night before was preparing their proposal to put on the table, and I was typing it up. And then the chairperson said, "Okay, Paul, print out, show me a copy of what we've got." And there was this one provision which had 4 options. And he said, "How can there be 4 options? There's us and the other side. There should only be 2 options." And I said, "Oh, no, all 4 of those options are from your delegation." And he's, "We can't put 4 options on the table. We can only have 1. But in talking, they had all thought they'd reached a consensus, because things can be very fluid and very flexible when you're talking. But it was only because the scribe had written down these 4 options that they were then able to say, "Okay, let's prioritize them, and we'll put this one on the table. This will be our fallback, and these other 2 are our bottom red line positions." It's also important because you should never underestimate the incompetence of the mediation team and their failure themselves to actually write down what is agreed upon. In more cases than I would like to remember, parties have gone into, that I've been working with, have gone into a negotiation, and the mediators did not have effective scribes. And you'll have a day of negotiating, very intense negotiation. You'll agree upon 3 or 4 things. You'll come back the next morning, and the mediator's got many things going on her or his head. And in one instance, they came back and they said, "Oh, we have these 3 issues that we discussed yesterday. We reached agreement on number 1, and it's going to be this. And we reached agreement on number 2, it's going to be this. And now let's discuss number 3. And my delegation went bananas because they'd actually reached agreement on number 3, and they had made concessions on number 1 and number 2 in order to get what they wanted on number 3. And the other side was ecstatic. They're like, "Yes, we should discuss number 3, and we need serious concessions from the other side in order to agree upon number 3. It was only because our delegation had written out, the scribe had written out literally a verbatim transcript of what happened and said, "No, excuse me, mediator, at 6:52, you had said, let's now turn to number 3. And then at 7, and then the mediator said, "Oh, that's right, we did do number 3. But for the fact that our delegation had a scribe writing that down, the other side was allied with the mediator and accused our delegation of bad faith." Similar, there was another situation where the international mediator had written down the wrong compromise and had typed in the compromise what the other party was proposing, not what the parties agreed upon. Because it was 2 a.m, everyone was tired. And it was only because our delegation had written it down, said, "No, we didn't agree on that. That was their proposal. This was our proposal. This is what we agreed upon, something else." A splitting of the difference. Nobody wants to be the scribe. You want to be the decision maker, the chairperson, the emotional one. No one wants to sit there and write everything down, but it is one of the most important roles in the negotiation.
Going back to our sports metaphor from the beginning, everybody has an important and critical role to play. So thanks for sharing a little bit about what each person does. Now, with our delegations assembled, What would you say is the one most important thing that the delegations can do to prepare for entering these negotiations?
The most important thing a delegation can do to prepare is to practice. Nobody would take the field, the soccer field, or the basketball court without practicing. Nobody would dream of doing that. Weirdly, when I suggest to our pro bono clients that they should practice negotiation, they look at me like I'm crazy. What do you mean practice negotiation? We can't just go find some war criminals and say, hey, we want to practice negotiating with you war criminals to stop the conflict. But in fact, the US government practices at the Foreign Service Institute every negotiation before they send a team abroad to do negotiations. They role play, they do negotiation simulations. We've done that with all of our clients around the globe. First hour or so, it's a little awkward. You're pretending to negotiate. But that's how you red team. That's how you see what your team's strengths are. Who makes a good spokesperson? Who makes a good antagonist? Who makes a good person of influence? Who's the scribe? Who has to write all this stuff down? But you do these simulations and you're then able to make your mistakes in an environment with your peers. You also learn how difficult it is. There's two mistakes that delegations make. One is they think that negotiation is an art, not a science, and you're either a born negotiator or you're not. And no, that's not actually true. It's highly complex, and you can have a very scientific and a very thought out approach to it. Second thing is they all think they have their positions down. So why would we need to practice? But they all have their positions. They don't necessarily have their fallback positions because no one wants to think about their compromise. They want to think about what it is they're going to achieve, and they're going to go and use their personal skill to achieve that. But the reality is you're going to have to probably make compromises or reconfigure your positions in order to achieve the maximum number of interests that you can. By practicing it, you get that sense. We had one pro bono client. He was the head of the delegation. It was a self-determination movement. And we did a negotiation simulation. He said, we are going to have our clock cleaned at this negotiation. We are all here on the same party. We've split. Some of us have agreed to be the evildoers, the other side. And in this mock negotiation, among all of us who are on the same team, we lost. The bad side, the evildoers, they actually won in this mock negotiation. Man, imagine when the real evildoers show up, what they're going to be able to do to us. We need to get our act together. We are not prepared for this negotiation. Good thing it happened during the practice round and not during the real round. They were able to up their game before they went into the real negotiations.
Thanks, Paul, for this conversation and for chatting through all the different delegation rules and how important each one really is. It's always a pleasure to sit down and speak with you, and this one in particular really helped to clarify how groups can better prepare for negotiations. So until next time, thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. It was my pleasure.